All right. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to everyone. Thank you for joining the F-1 Visa Preparation webinar hosted by the Duke International Student Center and Duke Visa Services. My name is Karen Sandler, and I'm the Associate Director of the Duke International Student Center. Joining me is Pamela Billy, Associate Director of Duke Visa Services. We are fortunate to have two very experienced immigration lawyers joining us for this session. Heidi Sun is a Duke alum, class of 1997. She is a founding partner of Kodem Son Tang Law Group with over 13 years experience in immigration law. She is joined by Dina Parker, who is a former senior U.S. diplomat with over 25 years of experience leading consular, immigration, and citizen services operations in complex political environments. Before we start, a few housekeeping issues. This webinar will be recorded. You may wish to change your name on Zoom or only include your first name to ensure your privacy. Please submit any questions you may have in the question part of the webinar at any time. Some of these questions may be answered within this section and some may be addressed live. Due to the number of questions we expect to receive, note that we will not be able to address all of them. Please do not include any personal details in your questions or ask questions pertaining to your own unique situation. Any individual or case-specific questions either submitted beforehand or during the webinar will not be answered. For these situations, we encourage you to contact Duke Visa Services or consult with an immigration lawyer via a paid consultation. This webinar is intended to provide general information only. And now I'm going to hand it over to our presenters, Heidi and Dina.
All right. Hi, everyone. I hope you can see my screen here with the PowerPoint. Dina, you can see it, right? All right, cool. So this session is how to be prepared for your F-1 student visa interview. And we're going to cover what to expect when you show up for your interview at the interview window. What are some of the common questions asked during your F-1 interview, some red flags to avoid, and being consistent and being honest. Again, my name is Heidi Sun. I'm an alum of Duke. I think this is my fifth or sixth webinar that I'm presenting for Duke International students. I was an international student myself. Dina is our immigration lawyer that was actually my neighbor in Taipei. She was the consular chief in Taipei when I was living there. Um, I know Karen already said this, but just wanted to make sure that um, you know that this is not legal advice, right? That this is for general information purposes only, right? Um, so let's have Dina start. Okay, Dina, if you want to unmute yourself. So why? So right here, what is the most important thing to keep in mind when you come to the F-1 interview?
Yeah, so I think one of the most important things is to be yourself and be honest and sort of tell your story to the officer and not try to have any kind of memorized phrases or something like that. Just be yourself and genuinely talk about what your plans are and what you're doing.
Okay, so what happens when you show up to the consulate?
So you're gonna go check in at a few different windows. You're gonna provide your paperwork, your passport, and things like that. And then at some point in the process, you're actually going to be in front of the consular officer having what is officially your interview. And they almost always begin by confirming your name, making sure that what they have up on their screen is you, so they don't, go off track with that. And then they'll go directly into asking you questions that are your interviews. So be prepared and don't think that there's going to be some kind of announcement telling you that, okay, now our interview is starting. When they start talking, that is the interview. And do your best to listen and understand what they're asking and to answer that. It's almost always going to be done in English. There may be a few exceptions if you're starting a program with English first before you start studying your actual subject, but that'll be on your I-20. If that's not on the I-20, they're going to want to use English throughout the interview.
There's this picture here of like a glass in between and the person standing. Is that pretty accurate, or are you put into a private room, or is this basically what it looks like?
Yeah, that's very accurate. You are almost never put into a private room unless you have a disability or an injury that makes it difficult for you to stand in the line.
All right. So moving forward. Okay, so what are some questions that you should expect?
All right. So for a standard visa, a student visa interview, the officer is going to ask, why do you want to go to the U.S. to study? Is there something specific about education in the U.S. or something specific about the school that you've chosen? Your major, what you're planning on studying and why? Who's paying for it? If you've got a scholarship, that'll all be laid out on the I-20. But if not, you're going to have to show how you or your parents or somebody in your life is funding the entire process. And then this is an important one. The officer will probably ask what you plan to do after you graduate, and they would want to hear about your plans for what you plan to do back in your home country. It's important to make it clear that you're going to go back home and use your U.S. education back there, even if you have some thoughts about additional things that you want to do in the U.S. This is not the time to discuss that. For here, the officer wants to hear about what you're doing back home.
So let's just talk about why these questions are being asked, right? Like, what is the purpose? What is the consular officer trying to um, confirm, right, from the student in order for them to be able to approve the student visa? My understanding is there's two important questions that the consular officer must feel confident that the student has conveyed um, accurately and honestly in order for them to feel like, okay, you deserve an F-1 visa. You are eligible for an F-1 visa, right? What are those two questions?
Yeah, so the two main things are, is this person a legitimate student? Is the true purpose of them going to the US on this visa to study? Or are they just using the student visa to get to the US and then they're going to do something else? They got to know that you're serious about studying. That's why you're going. And the second thing is that you don't intend to permanently remain in the US, that you're not using the student visa as an excuse to immigrate to the US, that you're going to go back. And that's sort of what I was saying about have a plan for what you're going to do with your degree back in your home country, because that helps show that you are thinking about that. That's your mindset.
So I just want to give a general legal framework background for the students. Basically, there are two types of visas that you can get to come to the United States. One is called a non-immigrant temporary visa. It could be a visitor visa, like a B1, F1 student visa, work visa, like an H-1B, or religious worker R1 visa, etc. Those are all like A through Z, alphabet soup of visas that are non-immigrant temporary visas. And then there's what's called immigrant visa, which most people think of as refer to it as a green card. And that is when you're applying to permanently reside in the United States, to live in the United States forever, right? So for all non-immigrant visas, except for two, and I won't go into details about that, you cannot have the intent to want to live in the United States forever when you are applying for that non-immigrant visa. So as an F1 student, maybe in your heart of hearts, you have a dream to live in the United States forever, but you are not going to be revealing that at this interview, and you do not have current intent to live in the United States forever. You may have a dream, you might be dreaming about it in your sleep, but you cannot be disclosing it at the interview. Okay? So that sort of goes hand in hand, right? Sort of like the very basic kind of questions that all non-immigrant visa, not just for F1 students, right? That they get these type of
Yes,
questions, right?
that's right. Yes.
Mhm.
And so here's another example of questions that the officer is going to ask to try to get a feel for your true intent, your plans, whether or not you have, like what Heidi just said, immigrant intent, or you're going temporarily. And so your previous US travel, they'll ask, have you ever been to the US before? It doesn't really matter if you have or haven't been to the US as a student. Sometimes it helps to see that you or you with your family have done previous international travel and gone back to your home country. That can be helpful to show that you don't have immigrant intent. You keep going back to your home country. But the officer also understands that many students are young and are not, independently doing a lot of international travel at that age. So that is not super important, but do be honest. Pretty
And
much
you
with
have to
everything.
disclose it on the
Yes.
DS-160 questionnaire. You want to be honest in filling out the DS-160 questionnaire. You don't want to be giving inconsistent information at the interview with whatever the DS-160, how you filled it out, right?
Yes, exactly.
They have a record
Um,
anyway of your US travel.
they
So,
do.
yeah.
Um, Another related topic is, do you know anyone living in the United States, or who will you live with in the United States? If you're going to live in the dorm, that's great. You're going to live in the dorm. If you have cousins living in the US, your best friend from high school already went there and is living in the US, your auntie, whatever, make sure you are honest about it and say, yes, my aunt lives in California and we visit every other year. But I won't be living with her because I'll be on the East Coast, that kind of thing.
Mhm. Okay. So let's talk about some key strategies.
So these interviews are generally very short. And so when the officer
How
asks you,
short, Dina? Because I think most people don't have any idea how these interviews, like how short, really short they are.
yeah, I mean, maybe 3 minutes. Sometimes if it's very, very straightforward, like 1 to 2 minutes, the officer will be done. And that's usually, if they're issuing, like they're ready, like they're giving the person the visa, let's move on. So it's not a bad thing to have a short interview.
Right.
Um,
I always tell my clients if it goes over 3 minutes, you're probably in trouble.
right.
So, okay, so like back to immigrant intent. If the student says, "Oh, I'm gonna work in the United States on OPT," that's okay, right? It's just you should still not just end there. You should be like, "Yeah, I want to get experience on OPT, getting a job that's related to my major because I want to be able to give back to my country and go back and
Yes.
like work in the industry back at home in Korea or wherever it may be.
Exactly.
Mhm.
Yeah, OPT is totally normal. There's nothing wrong with saying you look forward to doing OPT, but definitely connect it back to your plan for living and working in your home country.
So how about for those who like, a lot of these huge conglomerates send their employees to places like Duke, right, to get their
Mm,
MBA or usually it's the MBA, but and so if they're fully funded by, let's say, like Samsung or something like that. So
yeah,
then what if and they're coming with their entire family, right? So with two little kids and stuff. And a lot of them probably want to stay in the United States afterwards, right? Um, Not the time to be revealing that though, right?
definitely not.
Mhm.
It's great to have an employer sponsored um, education opportunity in the US, and the officer is not going to be worrying about whether you can pay for it or how you're going to support your family there because your company is paying for it. That's great. But if you then tell the officer that you're hoping to make a career change and, switch to another kind of visa so you can work in the US, that calls into question what your real plan is. And that's not something you want to bring up.
All right, so let's kind of like talk about what how should you answer these questions? I mean, not the actual like content, obviously, but um I always tell my clients like do not volunteer additional information. Don't go off tangent when the officer asks you question A, don't go on answering something related to Y. Um, be as brief as and concise and to the point as possible. But at the same time, you know, should the students advocate for their visa? Meaning, let's say the only thing that the officer asks is, what's your name? And then what will you study at Duke? Right? And then they don't ask
Mhm.
any other questions. And you just answer, I'm going to be studying um, computer science, right?
Yeah.
Like, should you just stop there?
I think it depends. If the officer is moving on to the next question, definitely don't try to keep talking because they're probably trying to keep it a very short interview. They may even already have in their head, like, I'm going to issue this applicant, so let's just get it done. But if they're not really asking you additional questions, I would definitely say, okay, my major is computer science, and if they don't say anything else and they're not talking, I would continue on and say, I hope to do this kind of job back in my home country. My home country is famous for this industry, and my goal is to work in that industry, to just give them a little more information about your plans. But definitely, if they cut you off, no problem.
Okay. So I think let's see. Oh, before we go there,
Mm,
for Duke students, generally speaking, I think two-part purpose that we talked about, right? So if are you a legitimate student? So for somebody who's been accepted to Duke and coming to study at Duke, I think the first part is pretty much a given, and
yeah.
the officer's not very concerned with that part, right?
Yes, that's
So
true.
that's a good thing
Yeah.
for those who are on the webinar right now. It's the second question that's going to be much more scrutinized, um, especially, I guess, depending on what country you're from, things like that. Okay, so we can delve into that a little later, but let's go on to this one, the small talk. What if you're
Yes.
from one of those countries, right? You're from one of what I mean by one of those countries is a what we call high fraud post, meaning it's a country where there's a statistically like a high percentage of people who say they're going for, let's say, B1 travel visitor visa, but they actually end up not doing what they say they're going to do or staying in the United States post uh, past their valid stay, right? So those are called high fraud posts. So so what about this the officer just kind of like chit-chatting?
Yeah, so I think anywhere in the world, it's important to keep this in mind. But yes, for high fraud posts, especially, the officers are almost certainly listening to everything that you say, with still in mind, is this person's true goal to be a student and to return to their home country afterwards? So they could be asking you about your weekend. They could be asking you about a tourist spot in your country. It might sound like they're saying, oh, what's a good place for me to go while I'm here in your country? They are All of that is part of the interview. And if you veer off topic and say something that makes them question what your plans are, that is going to be a factor in whether or not you're approved. The other thing to be aware of is they might switch into your native language. They might not, but they might. It doesn't mean the interview's over. It doesn't mean they're enjoying practicing their language with you. They are still conducting the interview. And typing what you're saying into the computer.
Okay. I guess that goes with everything you say is being recorded, right? I mean, they're not typing word for word everything you say,
Right.
obviously. But this is why we talk about honesty, being honest and consistent, correct? So everything you put on the DS-160, you want to be honest. Everything you say at the interview, you want to be honest. And then everything you say to the CBP officer when you come into the United States, you want to be honest. And all three should match or at least be
Yep.
consistent. It doesn't have to be matchy-matchy word for word, but it should be
Right.
consistent, right?
Right.
All right. So why, I mean, obviously lying is bad. We've been told since we're little that lying is bad. But what about for US immigration?
Yeah. So um, certainly there are people that lie or exaggerate, or they get nervous and they just throw out an answer, and they're not doing it with an intent to deceive the officer about the visa that they're applying for, but it still starts to make the officer think that this person cannot be trusted, that what they're saying is inconsistent, doesn't make sense. If they're lying about some small thing, maybe they're lying about their true intent and what their plans are after studying. So any kind of thing like that should be avoided. Even if you think, oh, this has nothing to do with my student visa, just don't do it. If you get nervous, stop talking.
So the nervous part. So I always tell my clients, I know for somebody who has been accepted to Duke, I'm sure everyone is super intelligent, super, you guys can speak English pretty proficiently or fluently. However, this is a different thing, right? Interviewing for a job, is nerve-wracking in of itself, but interviewing for a visa, I think, especially in this climate, has become very, very stressful. So I would say, I always tell my clients, practice the Q&A in front of a mirror. Like pretend you're in front of the officer, see what your face looks like. Are you like rolling your eyes up to the ceiling? Are you like twisting your fingers as you're like answering the questions? See what you look like and practice being calm and smiling, being friendly and respectful. I do want to emphasize the lie part. If it's an unrelated lie, I guess it might not have an immigration consequence other than the consular officer not trusting you and denying you a visa. But misrepresentation is a serious, serious record in your profile, and it could bar you from entering the United States forever. So it's an inadmissibility factor. So just be very, very careful. Also, if you get one visa denial, it makes it very, very difficult to get the next visa. And then if you get a second visa denial, then the third one becomes even more difficult, and then so on and so on. And even if you apply for an F-1 and it's denied, then and you apply for another type of visa, it could, depending on why it was denied, it can affect you trying to get another type of visa. For those of you who are from a visa waiver country, where you're allowed to enter the United States on ESTA without getting a visa for visitor purposes, like going to Disneyland or, something like that, you cannot use ESTA anymore if your F-1 is denied or any visa is denied. So just be careful that this is serious business. Like if your F-1 visa is denied, it will have serious consequences in terms of you wanting to come to the United States. Um,
Mm.
Not to scare y'all or anything. Okay, this part I think is pretty, it's like everybody should know this. This is very, you know, but yeah, you should be respectful. How about dress code, Dina? What do you think about the dress code? Do you have to be in a
Yeah,
suit and a
so
tie?
I mean, we don't need to see a suit and a tie, but I think the consular officers expect that people will show up, looking neat and put together, maybe a nice shirt and a pair of pants, not a band t-shirt and gym shorts. But there's no set dress code. Just dress as, as your as you like to present yourself neatly.
I always tell my clients business casual, like
Yeah,
at least a polo shirt if you don't want to do a full button-down shirt.
right.
Um, and for women, you don't have to be obviously in a like a dress or anything, but um, I know this sounds really conservative and but I'm like no open-toe shoes, don't wear sandals. I don't care how hot it is. Let's be respectful. You know, treat it like a job interview, I guess I would say. Okay. We talked about high fraud post a little bit here, right? Um,
Yes.
and that so you would expect, let's say, somebody from a high fraud post versus somewhere with no fraud or very little fraud, they would be questioned a little bit more closely, even though they're coming to Duke.
Yes, I definitely think the coming to Duke part does make it easier because they know that to get accepted at all is you're already going through a lot of vetting. But in especially in high fraud posts, there are other concerns that they're going to have. So it's still going to be a full interview. And I just want to emphasize from high fraud post point of view, um, don't rely on visa fixers, agencies, people telling you that their cousin got a visa because they memorized, two paragraphs to say, like, that kind of stuff is really not okay and will get you in trouble. The officers, the staff, everybody in those places knows about that stuff. It doesn't work. Just be yourself, be honest, and that's much better.
Yeah, so I mean obviously we're not going to be naming particular countries, but I also know that even non-high fraud posts, I know that there are a lot of um, not non-lawyers,
Right.
consultancies they call themselves or agencies they call themselves who do a lot of high volume like helping you fill out your DS-160s and prepare you for interviews. Um, like a lot of like after school type of programs, or there's a lot of places where they're preparing you to apply to be an international student in the United States, and they're not lawyers. They say, oh, when you are asked this question, answer it this way, or I would totally stay away from those unless they're lawyers, or unless they're lawyers who are advising you for just that portion, right? For the interview portion or something like that. Um, I've heard of a lot of people who've gotten um, denied, their visa denied because of it. So,
Yeah.
yeah. Okay. Okay. I think it's the same thing. Like avoid too vague, like like you don't really have any plan. You're just coming because you want to come to the United States and Duke is a fabulous, beautiful university, so you just want to come. Like that's probably not a good answer, right?
Yeah, you need a little more. I mean, again, Duke, is Duke, and it helps. But even so, if you've applied to Duke and you've been accepted, you must have more thoughts about what your plans are for the future than just saying, "I want to go to Duke." That's the extent of my plan. Think of a few more things to say about your major or your future jobs that you hope to have based on that.
Yeah, and saying something like, "Oh, my aunt told me to say this," or an agency told me to say this," or "Oh, my cousin got her F-1 approved by saying this, so I was told to say it," or any of those kind of answers. And people do say it because they get nervous. Um, and obviously Dina, it was a very nice, respectful, like officer, but there are some officers that can be pretty mean. I mean,
Yeah,
there's no other way
sometimes.
to, yeah, I don't know what else. Like, and they're human beings, right? Maybe they just woke up on the wrong side of the bed or they had an argument with their spouse before they came into the office and they're in just really bad mood. And I have heard, I know I shouldn't say this, but I have heard that there are some posts where they have um, like a contest to see how many, which officer denies more visas than like that month, which had the number one number of denials or whatever. So whether it's true or not, I don't know. But so and I've had like clients tell me that there were some officers who just for whatever reason, the way you filled out the DS-160, they already had in their mind that they're going to deny the visa. So the way they ask the questions is very like an interrogation, like a cop like grilling you, like, well, isn't it true that blah blah blah? Like I can't believe you got into Duke, like or whatever, right?
Right.
Um, so there, you know, but obviously you don't want to become flustered and you don't want to be disrespectful just because the officer is. You still want to be try to remain calm as much as you can and be as respectful as you can.
Yeah, and sometimes the way the officer comes across does not reflect their opinion. I've seen a lot of officers who are very brusque, not smiling, not friendly, no chit chat, and they're issuing a lot of visas. So don't think that just because someone isn't smiling and isn't chatting with you that they want to deny you. They don't necessarily. So keep sticking with your story and moving on. Sometimes officers just get stressed with the number of interviews they have to do in a day. They just don't want to waste any time with chatting.
So
Uh,
let's throw out that number because the first time I learned how many interviews that an officer does in a day, like was shocking to me, right? So
yeah,
about how many per day?
I mean, on average, 100, maybe up to 150 a day.
So
Different kinds of interviews. So
just
they're
imagine yourself sitting as an officer. Like if you're one of the first ones at 7 a.m., maybe you're lucky.
yeah,
If
you're lucky
yeah, but
for
if you're
sure.
like at 10:45, um, probably officer's tired and
Yep,
not
or into the lunch hour. Yep.
uh-huh. And usually the interviews are all mostly in the mornings, right? They don't do interviews in the afternoon mostly. Is that right?
Generally, the non-immigrant visa interviews are in the morning, sometimes immigrant visas in the afternoon, but there are times, especially during the busy student visa summer season, that they might be doing morning and afternoon student visa interviews. So,
Okay.
don't be alarmed if your interview is scheduled for after lunch.
Okay. So that basically covers in general sort of what we wanted to cover in like the content. So for the questions to expect, right? One, like why do you want to come to the US, right? Why are you studying that major, right? Why do you want to go to that school, Duke University? Those questions, I think, um, you should have pretty good, solid answers for those. And then, how are you funding your school, right? Like your
Mhm.
tuition and housing. So that might not be a specific question, and it might just be at the I-20, but that's a question that could come up if they're not happy with whatever, like sufficient, right? If they feel like there's not sufficient documentation of how you're going to pay, right?
Yeah,
And then what are your plans for after you graduate, right? They might not specifically ask that question, but they're kind of thinking, right? They want to know. Like
yep,
maybe the officer may never specifically directly ask that question, but that's a question that would really go through to your immigrant intent, right?
yeah.
Um, so what are your plans for after? Have you ever been to the United States? Do you know anybody in the United States? Right? Um,
Hmm.
there is a specific question on the DS-160. Do you have any relatives living in the United States? That's not just your immediate family. So that's not just your mom and dad and your siblings. So if you have an uncle or a cousin or whatever, you should disclose that.
Yeah.
Um, did we cover all the major questions that could be asked?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I guess that recalls, to my mind that some people might have family members who have filed immigrant visa petitions for them, like an uncle or an aunt. And so if the officer asks about that, do be honest. They can see it in the system, so there's no point in saying no. It's entirely possible that, your aunt or uncle did this in cooperation with your parents and you don't really know much about it, but just say, yeah, I think my aunt filed that. You know, it's that isn't something that will make it difficult for you to get a student visa. Again, it just goes back to being honest and making sure that if you've got an aunt that has filed a immigrant visa petition for you and you say, no, I don't have anyone that lives in the US, then the officer is going to be confused and concerned.
Mhm. Okay, so we're going to cover some of the questions that were asked prior to the July 4th weekend that were submitted online. And um, we're not going to answer any case-specific, individual-specific questions that were submitted. And also, some of the questions were directed to the school, to Duke University International Office, so we're not going to answer those. But we wanted to talk about some general questions that I think could probably relate to everyone. Um, the delays, right? Like there are some countries where F-1 visa interviews are not available for months, maybe even more than 12 months out, right? And obviously they need to be here by end of August. I believe that's when Duke starts. So what do you do in that circumstances?
So, yeah, that's an unfortunate situation. The best thing you can do is do your online appointment, make an appointment, whatever it is, even if it's past your report to school date, and keep checking and trying to go switch it to an earlier appointment. There are people canceling and rescheduling all the time, every single day, all around the world. So that's your best bet. You could try, if you're getting closer to your report to school date and you're still not able to get an earlier interview, you could try to request an emergency appointment. I don't know that that's going to be super successful because there's going to be a lot of students that are in the same situation, in whatever your home country's in. But you could try and say, I've been accepted to Duke. This is when we start. I need to be there by then. Is there any way I can get an earlier appointment? It doesn't hurt to ask.
Right. And I think depending on your major, right? And maybe the need for that type of specialist or engineer or whatever back in your home country, maybe or if you're doing some special like fellowship or something, maybe that could boost your chances, right? But if you don't know your major, you're a general liberal arts major, maybe it'll be a little bit more difficult.
It's really hard to say.
Yeah.
Yeah.
How about for those embassies that are closed for whatever reason, right? Like because of you know, health
Ebola.
issues or yeah,
Yeah.
or like there's a war going on,
Right.
What do you do about those? Mhm.
So, wherever you are, your first step should be to look at the website for the embassy or consulate that you would be applying to and see what the updates are. With some of these kind of global situations, they could be changing day to day. Sometimes, if a consular section is closed, it will say you can apply at X and such other place. But usually, that you're just kind of out of luck and have to wait. Especially for a situation like Ebola, that's really out of everyone's control, and it's just going to need to be resolved before they can get things going again. Unfortunately.
Yeah, and also the third country national. So if you're, let's say, from I'm just making this up, Belgium, and you want to go to Germany to do the interview because Germany's faster, let's say, right? That used to be allowed, but nowadays they're becoming a lot more strict with that,
Yeah.
right? The policy has been updated so that if you're just a visitor in that country, then you're not allowed to set up an interview. You have
Right.
to be a resident in that country or have some like work visa or some type of visa that's beyond just like visiting, correct?
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, so and we did get some questions about those who are from travel ban countries. So there's like 35 or so plus countries that are um, subject to the president's travel ban.
Mhm.
So for those from those countries, the only option is for them to apply for the national interest exception, correct?
Yeah. I mean, at the moment, yeah.
Yeah.
Again, I would encourage people to continue to check because things change, but yeah, it's a difficult
Yeah.
situation.
So the national interest exception is national interest of the US, correct? Not the
Yes,
home
yes.
country. Yes. So then this makes it very difficult because if you are, let's say you have some like you're coming to get your PhD in aerodynamics engineering and you're going to be working with the professor of Duke University. I don't know who may that be, but whatever, right? And you are going to be working on this research project. If that research project is directly somehow promoting some national interest of the US, right? They're like
Hmm.
developing some stealth aircraft. I don't know. Then maybe, right? You need to come to help with that research that you were supposed to come do. But
Right.
if you're like an undergraduate student, undeclared major,
Yeah.
yeah, not, right?
Yeah. I mean,
Yeah.
it's definitely the types of industries or sectors that the US needs more of. So yeah, like science, maybe healthcare adjacent,
Mhm.
and usually at the higher like PhD level.
Yeah.
So I mean, I don't think it's worth trying if you're, an undeclared person starting your
Freshman
undergrad
year.
degree.
Yeah.
It's just that there is no U.S. national interest in that situation. So you know, it's not worth going through the effort of trying to make that argument.
Right. Um, especially to pay a lawyer to do it for you.
Yes, yes, right.
Yeah. Um, a good lawyer should say, yeah, you don't have a shot, just save your money. But
Right.
you never know. Okay. What about administrative processing? So there's obviously different types, right? Like
Yep.
it could be just like they need you to submit some additional documents and you need to check. And I've seen those take about 2 months usually, or less. But usually I would give it at least 1 to 2 months before the consulate officer gets back to the applicant and says, okay, now you can come and get your passport, right? And get your visa stamp.
Yeah, I would just say on that type where they've asked you to provide something, the faster you provide it, the faster they get back to deciding. So if you take a month to get the stuff back to them, they're not looking at it. It's just like nothing is happening.
But let's say even after you've submitted the documents, it's not like immediate. Like it's not like the next day they'll like, well, I've never heard of that. Usually,
Occasionally, yes. If it's something very simple, like you're applying for a student visa and you forgot, I don't know, your transcript from your undergrad and you're going for masters and the officer wants to see it. You send it in, they see it, they decide to issue. It could literally be the next business day. But if
okay.
it's something more complex where the officer is going to have to look through it and make a decision,
Mhm.
it's not going to be.
Yeah.
It'll probably be
So
weeks.
I usually tell my client, be patient. It's going to be at least a month, probably 2 months.
Yeah,
That's what I tell them. But how about for like if there's any kind of security concerns, like your name matches somebody, you wouldn't know, obviously. But if there was no documents requested and
yeah,
it just goes to admin processing, that usually means there's some kind of security concern, right?
yeah. It can be. There's something that needs to be checked, and that again is not something you can provide as the applicant. It's something the officer needs to check, behind the scenes, and unfortunately, that can take varying amounts of time. It can take a couple weeks, or it could take months and months and months,
Or years I've had
or
in some,
or
yeah.
years. Yes.
So
Um,
it could be like, let's say your name matches Mohammed something and it just matches exactly like somebody else who's on some kind of list.
right,
Or it could be like your family member shows up as having some kind of connection to the national military or some kind of political party that's not, you know,
right.
like US friendly, I guess, or something like that. But you just don't know. They won't tell you. So, okay, documents to take. This, I just wanted to point out to the Department of State website. If you go to the Department of State website, there is a reciprocity rule, like civil documents listing per country. So, like, it'll tell you, like, okay, for I'm just making it up. Birth certificate. If you're from Korea, you need to take this type of birth certificate. If you're from Japan, you have to take this type of birth certificate. So it gives you pretty clear like what domestic documents you need to take. But for the list of documents for an F-1 visa, you should go to the US consulate of your home country and see what they've listed there. Okay.
Yep.
Okay. Because we have not that much time. We have 10 more minutes. I do want to talk about some stuff about there was one question about if a spouse or dependent is coming on an F2, if they can work for as a contract, continue to work as a contractor for a company back home. Okay. Um, as you all know, F1 and F2 cannot work, right? F1 and F2. Neither one can work. So I call it what's called the butt test, right? If your butt is actually sitting in the United States, you cannot work, period. It doesn't matter who it's for, whether it's for a foreign company or for a US company, or if you're self-employed and you're going to be an entrepreneur starting an online business on Amazon, eBay, any of those, and the money that you earn is going to a bank account back home and it doesn't ever touch US soil, that still doesn't matter. It's considered unauthorized work. So I would like you get your visa stamp and you're good, you pass the CVP, security, and you come to the United States and then you screw up and do something that you're not supposed to. That can affect you getting your visa stamp a second time when you renew, and or if you ever want to apply for a green card, it can really, really bite you in the, you know. So, like any under the table tutoring, for example, I know online tutoring is hot these days. Um, Especially like a Duke student, right, is probably very highly sought after from certain countries, right? Maybe your mom has a friend back home and they're willing to pay you $150 an hour to like tutor their daughter back home, and you think, oh, it's all just on Zoom and and I'm just tutoring this kid and they're paying my mom at the bank account at home, it should be fine. Technically, that's unauthorized work. Technically, I would just not do anything that like jeopardizes your status. It's called the violation of your status. So, if you want to be a passive investor, let's say like buying stocks or something like that, that's okay. But you cannot be an entrepreneur starting a business, anything online, physical, none of that. Um, okay. Who needs to attend the interview, Dina?
Well, now everybody that's going needs to attend the interview. There used to be age limitations for children and for elderly people where they didn't have to appear. That's no longer the case. So if you are going with your family, your spouse, your kids, everyone has to go to the interview.
Okay. So it doesn't matter if you're like 6 months old or 80 years old, right?
Right,
You're
right.
going. Okay. Okay. And then how about I do see one question here that I think we could cover. Do you have to show ability to pay the tuition for just the first year or the entirety of your program?
It is for the entirety of the program.
Right. That's what I would think. Mhm.
And I mean, it goes back a little bit to what you're saying about unauthorized work. The officers want to see that you aren't going to need to do unauthorized work to get through your 4 years. You are able to pay, or your parents are able to pay, or whoever is paying.
Right. Um, okay. I think we covered most of the sort of general questions. Um, oh, there was a question on F1 visa stamp before. If you have a valid F1 visa stamp that's not expired, right? So and you got it for, let's say, a previous school. So let's say you went to undergrad, I don't know, heaven forbid, UNC, and then you're now going to grad school at Duke. So your visa stamp says UNC, but there was no gap in between your UNC undergrad and you're going straight to your MBA at Duke. Can you still use that UNC visa stamp to enter the United States and not have to go to another interview for the Duke MBA?
Yes, as long as you have the new I-20.
Okay. So I would caveat that though. Technically, yes, you are able to do that. When you enter the United States, you show your visa stamp, F1 visa stamp that says UNC on it, and you show the I-20 with Duke on it, and you explain to the CBP officer, I just finished UNC undergrad, whatever, history major, and now I'm going to the MBA at Duke, right? I have had, though, clients where they were stopped and not allowed to enter when there was a mixed match. Okay. So when, so it's a CVP training issue. It's
Yeah.
not a, like a, you can't be admitted with the visa stamp that has a different name of the school. But all kinds of things are happening nowadays. And
Yeah.
so do if you can go get the interview on time, in time, I would just get the interview and get the new visa stamp. That would be my recommendation.
Yep.
Oh, there was another question in here that I think the whole talk of DS, duration of status for F1 students on their I-94 versus having an actual end date
Yeah.
on their I-94. Now, that's still in discussion. It has not been implemented. Um, so I would just double check whenever you enter the United States on your F1, go online to the F1, I mean, not F1, I-94 online website. You can always check your I-94 and make sure that there's no errors on there. So it should say DS still. If it doesn't, then you should contact the CBP that you entered through and try to get it corrected. Okay. Um, these are our email addresses here. And I wanted to share, Pamela or Karen, how do I share the link to set up um, a, a consultation if somebody needs a consultation? I see somebody had a visa denial. We can't answer your question like that here. So
Heidi,
where,
you can
where
drop that in the chat.
okay, in the chat that says Q&A chat,
Oh, no, just the regular
host and
chat
panelist chat.
bar. There's an option for everyone.
Okay, let me see. Okay.
Everyone.
Let me try to get it here so that we have. So that takes you straight to our availability on terms of our scheduling and a consultation. And if, let's say, you really like your interview is in 2 days and you don't see any availability, especially given the time difference or whatnot, please feel free to email us. I'm gonna put it here so, and maybe we can try to make something happen sooner. Also, just an FYI that I usually hold a H-1B O1 E2 like possible visa types that are available after you graduate on webinar in October is usually when I do it, so that the international students kind of settle in, and then when and then they could attend the webinar if they're interested. I would highly encourage students to attend, even if you're not a senior. These kind of planning for your next step, if you do want to stay in the United States, should start early. Freshman year, sophomore year is better than like being in your senior and being like, oh, well, I don't qualify for any of those, for instance. Okay. Um, so we do have that, as well as I have done also green card application, sort of the green card options and steps webinar as well. And if people are interested in that, I'm happy to set that one up as well with the Duke International Office. That probably won't be until probably January-ish or so, if we do have one. Okay, and let me quickly look through some of the questions again and see if there's, because we do have 1 minute. 1 minute. Let me see. Okay. So there is a question about F1 allowed to do internship in the United States. So you have to be careful. If it's a paid internship, then it could be considered work. So you probably should get CPT authorization. Okay. You should talk to the international office and make sure you get approval for that. The the if you do too many hours on CPT, it could lessen the number of hours that you can do or the period for OPT. So I would just be careful on that as well. Okay. Uh, so I think we answered a lot of these questions already. Okay, so rental income is past what I would call passive investment income. So I think that's okay. Profit from business, if if he's actively operating and managing and directing while he's physically in the United States, I think that could become a little bit more problematic. It's a little gray. If he travels back to the country often and he's directing only while he's at home, and then does barely anything at while he's in the US, maybe it just looks a little, yeah. If he's mostly home and he comes visit you in the US on an F2 just once in a while, then maybe that's like if he's majority of the time is home, then maybe it's okay. It looks a little less suspect. I would just be careful with that. Uh, okay, I think we covered everything that's not case individual specific. Mhm. All right. For future webinars, there should be an email announcement or something, whatever way that the international office, I guess, e-blast or whatever, to let everyone know. Okay. Karen, you're muted, I think.
Thank you for that. Um, we'll be happy to inform you of any future webinars. And I just want to thank Heidi and Dina again for their time in answering all our students' questions. And students, I want to tell you it's going to be okay. Do your best at your interview, and we can't wait to welcome you in person at Duke. So have a wonderful rest of the day.
Thank you so much.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.